Hey, what's up YouTube? Earlier this morning I finished reading just a short little text that I had been live streaming on my channel called Theory of the Avant-Garde. It took me just a couple of hours to read all in total, spread out over the course of a week. Pretty interesting book. It's all there. You can listen if for some reason you'd want to do that, but I just wanted to upon the occasion of finishing this book, I just wanted to take a moment to record a little video talking about my personal connection to art as an institution, why I studied it, and why I think that aesthetics more generally is an important topic, and why people who are interested in, left-wing politics and theory should be interested in aesthetics as well, which might seem a bit distant from other political concerns. So I'm currently wrapping up my BFA in doing a double major in philosophy and art history and film studies. My school has a combined program that has just a bunch of core courses from art history, from the two art history and film studies departments, and I actually went into that. The reason that it's taking me 6 years to finish my degree is because I went into that program pretty late, deciding to add a second major on when I was already 3 years into school, and I had to do a bunch of extra credit, surplus credits. I'd already finished my philosophy degree, but I decided to study art history and film studies because I am a writer, and I wanted to open up for myself, because as a writer I've read a lot of novels, and I feel like novels and that whole canon is just generally more accessible to me. And obviously, as somebody who has studied philosophy, I have some background, I have some entry point into that. But art, films as well. I kept a film blog when I was a teenager. I've watched a shit ton of movies, a lot of canonical movies. I'm pretty decently versed in the history of film, although not necessarily in the theory of film. But art in particular, I have no real personal connection to. I hadn't really, I've been to museums, of course, and art shows and everything, but I didn't feel a strong connection to it, so I decided to study it because I felt like getting a formal education in it would as opposed to English literature, for example, which is more relevant to what I actually want to do with myself, which is write books. I decided to study art history because I felt like I would benefit from having a structured and formal entry into that canon. And I just wanted to, I think that it's always good for any artist to expand their horizon beyond the domain that they themselves, or the medium that they themselves have chosen to work in. So that's kind of why I decided to study art history. I don't know too much about it. I've done a bunch of basic courses, but I've done a lot of reading on my own. And I have the advantage over most art history students that I already have a background in philosophy and theory, so I'm more, this is not to overstate my own competence, but I am somewhat more used to that sort of reading and just reading in general than most art history students. But so the reason that sorry, I just had to turn off the camera because somebody was passing by. I didn't want to seem like a real weirdo who records YouTube videos of themselves talking into a camera. But I find it pretty interesting to think about aesthetics and art specifically from a Marxist perspective, because there's a question of how does art as a commodity, first of all, oil paintings in particular, some oil paintings are literally the most valuable commodity that exists on the planet. No other single object is sold for as high of a price as like a Basquiat or like a Warhol or whatever. I mean, I think that just boils down to a distinction between price and value. Like, I think Marx can just say that there's like the price of an object does not necessarily represent the value of it. Like Matisse can like toss off a little line drawing in 5 seconds, and that will fetch for millions of dollars, but that does not say anything about the labor theory of value necessarily. So that's like an interesting question, but perhaps a minor one. But I think that it is my real interest in aesthetics I'm interested in this concept that I got from Kierkegaard and Nietzsche to a lesser extent, and Deleuze obviously used it quite a bit, but this idea of indirect communication. It's something that I have experienced very powerfully when reading the works of those two figures in particular, and just like in reading works in particular. It's really like something that pertains very powerfully to literature as opposed to visual arts. But the idea of indirect communication is like you do not like you don't say explicitly what it is that you're trying to say, but you say, like, you speak around the topic such that the viewer comes to the conclusion that you want them to. They still come away with the same idea, but because they themselves have to connect the dots, it has a much greater impact because it is not just spelled out in an argumentative fashion, like point A, point B, and the conclusion, but it is something that they can arrive to. So it has the like sensation of an epiphany. It's just like way more impactful. So that's like an aesthetic question, and I think that as it pertains to politics, like culture in particular is a very important issue. So this is to say on the topic of indirect communication, that is, I believe, an aesthetic question, and because of the potential of like there's nothing about that concept that gives it any particular political valence, but because my conviction just from having experienced that kind of power in the works of Kierkegaard, in the works of Nietzsche, and in other literary works that have just like affected me far more powerfully than any like explicit argument for why we should abolish capitalism. My conviction is that indirect communication is an essential part of building class consciousness. We need to use culture, we need to have an aesthetic approach to building class consciousness, that the tool is so powerful that why wouldn't we put it to use? And I'm reminded of this passage from the Deleuze book, Nietzsche and Philosophy, where he, at the end of like this long section, multiple chapters, he kind of gets into like how like thought and life are related, and then how culture is related to that as well. I'll do a video on that at some point, but I just want to end off this video with 2 questions, opening up to future videos for myself. The first being, I want to get into that point that Deleuze makes. I thought it was very impactful when I first read it. I'm going to have to crack open that book a bit and we'll get into it. But the other thing that I want to talk about at some point in the future, I'll have to do more research about this, but it's something that I'm thinking of as like the conservative advantage, which is that like these right-wing people do not have the same obligation as the left does to like speak explicitly about. They simply do not. You don't hear like right-wing people theorizing in the same way that left-wing people do. I was reading this big thread today in response to this very beautiful meme that I saw this morning that really made me cry, but the comments were on Twitter were, it was just univocally like hating on the meme and the left in general. There's a bunch of right-wing people like using that old familiar trope about how the left can't meme, about how the left have to come in with like a fucking essay in the place of their meme, and then like they're just not going to read all that. The meme itself was not a joke. It wasn't meant to be funny. It was very moving. I'll put a link to it, but one comment in particular that it wasn't just one comment. It was like a whole sustained argument between people representing the two sides here. But is the idea of like, why is it that the lefts need to spend so much time and energy and space justifying their worldview, and the right-wing position is that it's because their worldview is a denial of reality, and therefore they need to spend a lot more energy constructing like a defense of their fantasy, whereas the right-winger, the conservative position, is able to just speak simply and like more directly express their truth. They don't need to, they can just say a sentence, whereas a left-wing person would need to say more than that. Obviously, I do not buy this argument for a minute. I just think that pertains to the question of indirect communication and the general domain of aesthetics, and I'm going to have to do a little bit more research to figure out what the hell I want to say here, but I think it's a very important topic that I want to make a video on some point. I mean, as much as I value indirect communication, and as much as I believe that it is a more effective pedagogical technique than just like perhaps argumentation, although argumentation obviously has its place as well. They're both very important, and one does not like outrule the other. But on this channel, you're going to hear a lot of direct communication, and it's because I think that it is fun, it is interesting, it is a good exercise of the brain, and because it is simply more difficult. I mean, I don't want to get into it too much here because I'll make another video about it, but it is simply more difficult to be on the left, to construct a vision of society and how to get to that society, something that has never been achieved, at least in the centers of capital, than it is to be on the right, where you are able to just support the status quo because it is to your advantage. And ultimately, I really think that the right does not feel the same need to publicly theorize, because the right theory is against human interest. It is against the social interests, and if they were to publicly theorize, then they would out themselves as inhumane. But I'll say more on that. Speak more on that at some point. That's it for now. See you next time.